Chapter Timeskip 1-8. An excerpt from the text Unbent, Unbowed, Unbroken written by Maester Alec, 209 AC. As expected by all architects of the conquest of Dorne, Lord Aaron Dane was quick to reject the initial terms offered by the Iron Throne. Although the offer was beyond generous, there was a great desire for war amongst the people of Dorne. Nearly all believed that winter and the political situation within the Seven Kingdoms would destroy the invaders long before Sunspear was forced to yield. Indeed, for a while it seemed that the Dornish may have been correct in their assessment of their foes. Over 300 lords of Westeros answered the calls to war, and it took months for all to be in position in spite of the warning all had received. Yet the bad luck afflicting the armies of King Viserys was not to stop there. It had been the hope of the king to launch his invasion the moment the Dornish rejected his terms, yet winter storms prevented the launch of the fleet for a full 5 months. It was well into the year of 117 AC that King Viserys came to besiege Ironwood. Events were not proceeding any smoother for the armies gathered under the command of Prince Laenor either. No sooner were the terms rejected that both assembled armies found themselves under assault by Dornish raiding parties under the command of Lord Walter Will. Prince Laenor proved his worth as a warrior during this time and gained the respect of many lords in his defense of Nightsong. Yet Prince Laenor's forces at Nightsong were not the worst hit by Dornish raiding. The events of history tell us that Lord Walter Will was a cunning man with a grasp of strategy and politics rarely seen. Whilst his raids at Nightsong were numerous, the true force of his raiders was brought to bear against the armies assembled at Horn Hill. The forces there were already in disarray, with green and black loyalists being forced into close quarters, exacerbated by the fact that Lady Lena Valerion, the last rider of the Dragon Vagor, had no direct control over the forces. That honor had been granted to Ormond Hightower, a knight of some renown and the heir to Lord Garmon Hightower. From the moment of the first raids, the forces at Horn Hill fractured, and Ser Ormond did not prove up to the task of bringing them into line. As such, the defense was limited, and with each successful raid, pressure on Ser Ormond mounted. During this period, Ser Ormond's forces would lose a full fifth of their number, and Lady Lena Valerion would take a wound that would trouble her for years to come. However, the luck the Dornish had experienced so far was to run out during the second moon of 117 AC, when King Viserys' forces finally crossed the Sea of Dorne. Lord Kyle Ironwood was quick to contest the landing, but his raids did little to prevent King Viserys from landing his full force and marching on Ironwood proper. Unwilling to face the Red Queen and her rider, Rhaenys Targaryen, Lord Kyle abandoned his seat and joined forces with Walter Will, intent on using the Boneway as a protection from the Targaryen dragons. It was at this point the trap that Prince Laenor had laid for the Dornish became apparent, as both his forces and the forces of King Viserys moved into the Boneway to crush the Dornish opposition. The trap was so complete that when Lord Kyle and Lord Walter attempted to dissolve their troops and take refuge in the Red Mountains, as they had done countless times before, they found themselves quite unable to do so. The Falcons, under the command of Lord Dennis Waynwood, and the Desert Wolves, under the command of Bernard Stark, served to pick off any fleeing or deserting soldiers. With the trap sprung, the forces of the Iron Throne looked set to have earned an unprecedented victory over the Dornish on their own soil. Lord Walter Will was to prove once again, however, that his black reputation was well given. On the morn that the Dornish and the invaders looked set to clash, Lord Walter Will betrayed Lord Kyle Ironwood and used his destruction to cover his and his loyalists' escape into the Red Mountains. Despite that setback, Will and Ironwood were taken and the road to Dorne had been opened. An excerpt from the text Bastard Born written by Rue, 155 AC. Adam and Alan of Hull were first found and brought to the attention of the court by Queen Alicent Hightower. She was on the island to prepare for birth and recover from it. She'd brought many ladies with her, and she was soon a familiar sight about the island as she rode with them, even as heavily pregnant as she was. After Princess Visera, the one people would call the Princess of Peace, was born, Queen Alicent found the 2 boys and their mother accidentally when her spies found the boys were tutored by a man hired by Ser Joffrey Valerion, a highly placed supporter of Princess Rhaenyra. Curious about why the boys were so interesting, Queen Alicent paid a visit to the boys' mother, Marilda of Hull, and demanded she name the father of the 2 bastard boys. When Marilda refused and was moved away afterwards, Queen Alicent sent her many spies to find out why. Her spies questioned those who had known them on Hull and found that until Princess Rhaenyra had taken custody of the 2 boys, they had been cared for by Lord Corlys Valerion. When rumors spread of that, Princess Rhaenyra claimed that they were the bastards of her good father. Lord Corlys backed her up and formally claimed the 2 as his own, making them Adam and Alan Waters. Queen Alicent was not happy with the idea and wrote Rhaenys Targaryen about the boys. When she read the letter, she is said to have laughed it off and said, "I married that old bastard knowing what he was like," to her cousin, King Viserys. In the third moon of 117 AC, a new rumor was widely believed to be the truth about the boys. They were not, as Princess Rhaenyra claimed, the children of Lord Corlys Velaryon, but were instead the bastards of his son, Ser Laenor. As the boys got older, their looks only increased this belief, as it said they looked greatly alike to Ser Laenor. Princess Rhaenyra was furious about the rumor and publicly referred to Queen Alicent as an interfering bitch many times afterwards. Anyone who mentioned the rumor to her fell quickly into disfavor, which was taken as further proof that Ser Laenor had fathered the boys. It should be noted that Hard as Oak, despite being considered as colorful and unreliable as Bastard Born by the Citadel, and The Dragon Knight, which is considered to be reliable and factual by the Citadel, support the official claim that Lord Corlys fathered both Adam and Alan of Hull. An excerpt from the text unbent, unbowed, unbroken written by Maester Alec, 209 AC. With Lord Kyle Ironwood's capture and defeat in the Boneway, the forces of the Iron Throne now held both Will and Ironwood. Yet they were not uncontested in their control. Skirich, Kingsgrave and Blackmont had yet to fall. This would not be the responsibility of Prince Laenor or King Viserys, however, for within a night of taking Ironwood and capturing its lord, King Viserys' army began its advance into Dorne proper. Its first target was to be the lands under the dominion of House Wells, the first of Princess Aelyandra's loyalists to come under attack by the invading force. In contrast to Lord Walter Will's aggressive strategy, the forces of Lord Jaehaerys Wells fell back and yielded their lands with only minor raiding. King Viserys' armies were not to occupy the castle, however. After a few days had been spent ensuring the army was resupplied courtesy of Lord Corlys Velaryon's fleet, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen destroyed the outer walls, leaving little to no fortification behind for Lord Wells to reclaim. In the fourth moon of 117 AC, as King Viserys moved further into Dorne towards his next target of Drinkwater, the forces at Hornhill marched into Prince's Pass. Fearing a similar trap that had brought Lord Walter and Lord Kyle low, the forces of Lord Manfrey Fowler split into three separate armies. When Ser Ormond attempted a similar strategy to Prince Laenor and employed irregulars formed from men knowledgeable about the pass to prevent them from splitting entirely, his forces were routed and Lord Tarly was slain. It was only the intervention of Lady Lena Velaryon that saw Lord Tarly's body and his Valyrian steel blade Heartsbane recovered from the field, and a third of his irregulars escaping the Dornish ambush they had unwittingly sprung. Lord Manfrey Fowler and the vast majority of his men were nevertheless able to escape Ser Ormond's forces. Having secured the pass, however disastrously, Ser Ormond marched on to seize Blackmont. It was here that the cracks in the facade of united leadership were to once again appear. After sacking the castle, Ser Ormond ordered Lady Lena to destroy it in its entirety. Unhappy with such orders, Lady Lena refused and was backed by several Black Lords. Mutterings of a plot by Ser Ormond to weaken those with black leanings first arose during this tense standoff, with many pointing to Lord Tarly's death as proof of this. The stalemate was only broken by the arrival of Prince Laenor himself with grim news. As King Viserys' forces had prepared to take Drinkwater, their mother had been attacked and was badly wounded. Although details must have been scarce about the event at the time, surviving records written in King Viserys' hand tell us that Lady Rhaenys was ambushed by a man convincingly disguised as a soldier in Wendwater livery. Although she is said to have killed the man with nothing more than a dagger, she suffered several wounds in fighting off her attacker. With Princess Rhaenys unable to fly malaise in battle, King Viserys, taking the advice of Prince Laenor, was forced to alter his battle plan. The prince would join King Viserys' forces and support the main army as it carried on its march to threaten Sunspear itself. Lady Lena Velaryon would be based at Ironwood as her brother had been, with a full third of the forces there moving under Ser Ormond's command so that he could continue his subjugation of the Stony Dornish. It is rumored that during this meeting, Prince Laenor and Ser Ormond nearly came to blows and that such a fight was only averted by a surprise attack on the outer defenses of the camp. After the attack was repelled, Prince Laenor refused to speak with Ser Ormond once more and instead relayed his orders through the newly made Lord Alan Tarly. By the end of the 7th moon of 117 AC, the reshuffle of the invading forces was done and the stage for the massacre at Ghost Hill was set. An excerpt from the text The Seven Ladies of Rhaenyra Targaryen, by Meredith Stokeworth, 190 AC. The seventh and last of Princess Rhaenyra's ladies is considered one of the oddest appointments that Princess Rhaenyra would ever make. When one takes into account those she raised later, this is quite the feat. If my great-aunt's letters are to be believed, the event that saw her forge her friendship with the princess was quite unique indeed. Below is an excerpt of her letter concerning the matter. To my most noble father. I am praying most every day for your safety as you fight alongside our king. Lady Felena and I have prevailed upon Septon Patrek to lead daily prayer groups beseeching the Seven that the matter with Dorne be resolved quickly. No doubt you have already heard the rumors surrounding the attack on Princess Rhaenyra. It was cowardly and ill done. All in King's Landing are in uproar. I can only dread to imagine what would have happened should the villains have succeeded. In truth, it came perilously close to being so. Had it not been for Lady Fry, I fear our princess may have been struck down. Princess Rhaenyra has named her a lady-in-waiting to join us whilst her husband is with you on campaign. Father, I fear it is uncharitable of me to dislike such an appointment after she's so bravely saved our princess's life, but I cannot help but mislike my new compatriot. Subita is rude and unladylike in the extreme. Just yesterday she attended on the princess in mail. The rest of the letter goes into more personal details surrounding my great-aunt's courtship with her future husband Sir Byron Hastwick and the ongoing troubles that Lady Maris Grafton was having in regards to her marriage to Sir Harwin Strong. In a most concerning turn of events, it ends with a mention of the villain Larry Strong being willing to help them marry despite Lord Lionel's refusal to bless the union. Regardless, it can be understood that even from the beginning that the appointment of Subita Fry was as divisive as it was bizarre. An excerpt from the text unbent, unbowed, unbroken written by Maester Alec, 209 AC. Thus the forces of King Viserys and Prince Laenor were able to secure God's grace with little opposition. As before, they were swift to dismantle the castle's defenses and prepare to move on to threaten Sunspear proper, in a move that would hopefully see the war ended. Yet as the king and prince prepared to bring the conquest of Dorne to a decisive close, a most terrible act had been set in motion. Many historians have argued over the causes of the massacre at Ghost Hill. Some more popular theories lean on the black reputation Lady Lena Valerian garnered later on in her life, others point towards vengeful lords unwilling to follow the word of a mere woman. Regardless of its reported cause, all agree that the senseless slaughter of House Toland was a dark day in the history of Westeros. What we do know is that the confusion caused by Prince Laenor's reshuffling of the forces to account for his mother's absence in the war effort meant that somehow several lords who would name themselves Proud Greens ended up in the army supported by Lady Lena Valerian. When Prince Laenor and King Viserys began their march along the scourge towards God's grace, that force left Ironwood and headed for their targets of Lady Bright Castle and Ghost Hill, achieving excellent time by using the fleet's support to bypass the already taken castles of Wells, Drinkwater and the Tor. As House Wells, Drinkwater and Jourdain before them had, the denizens of Lady Bright Castle had also fallen back to Sunspear. The occupation there was concluded quickly and the army began its fateful march onto Ghost Hill. House Toland had not fled in the face of the oncoming army. Survivors have stated that Lord Allard Toland had heard of the King Viserys' offer of surrender and Lord Aaron Dane's planned response in turn, resolving to emulate Princess Aelyandra's regent and surrender Ghost Hill to the invaders. When Vhagar plunged the castle into shadow, Lord Allard threw open his gates and prepared to negotiate his terms. Multiple accounts have risen as to what, precisely, began the slaughter. Some claim that Vhagar was the first to attack, letting loose a great belch of flame and igniting a tower. Others claim that a Dornish archer, panicked by Vhagar's presence, shot at one of the approaching lords. Most official reports blame Ser Dickon Bulwer for the initial fighting, however. It is said that no sooner had Lord Allard come into view that Ser Dickon ordered his archers to loose and slay the unarmed lord. What occurred afterwards well earned its moniker. By the time the sun set, only 2 members of House Toland were left alive along with 15 men-at-arms and 7 servants who had managed to barricade themselves in a wine cellar. The party would only emerge on the assurances from Lady Lena herself that they would not be harmed. Her protection of the survivors was met with much consternation by those who had joyfully taken part in the massacre. Once the killing was done, the forces sent to secure Ghost Hill split into 2 factions. The so-called Green Men, led by Ser Dickon Bulwer, and the Queen's Men, led by Lord Alan Tarley. Fearing the army would turn on itself, Lady Lena Valerian is said to have sent word to her brother to bring the dissidents back into line and reappoint a clear commander of the men. Yet despite seeking her brother's aid to peacefully resolve the conflict, by sunrise the next morning most of the so-called Green Men were dead by her order. The version of events depicted in Lord Alan Tarley's memoirs are widely accepted to be true accounts of what happened next. He claims that the letter Lady Lena sent to her brother was sent in good faith. Yet as the army settled in for the long wait for a reply, one of the 2 surviving children of House Toland were slain. There were no witnesses to the murder. Upon discovering the body, Lord Tarley writes that Lady Lena flew into a towering rage and ordered for Ser Dickon's Green Men to be seized. Lord Tarley goes on to write, quite proudly, that it was he who led the attack on the Green Men, and that it was he who personally brought Ser Dickon to face Lady Lena. He does not write, however, of what came next. Only that by morn, Lady Lena had ordered that most of the Green Men be given to Vhagar's flames. An excerpt from the text Dark Sister, a dark tale of a dark blade written by Maester Gilbert, 313 AC. With the defeat of Daemon Targaryen and the disaster at Bloodstone, Dark Sister was thought lost to House Targaryen. It was luck, and perhaps the blessing of the Seven, that saw it return to its rightful owners once more during the conquest of Dorne. As Prince Laenor Velaryon, husband of the future Queen Rhaenyra, laid siege to the Tor with his good father, he led a counter-raid against Dornish forces. During this minor skirmish, he slew several men in single combat. Afterwards, to the surprise of all his men, he recovered that lost blade from the corpse of one of his opponents. When the prince sought to return it to King Viserys, his good father announced he could think of no one more worthy to wield the blade and cleanse the stain of dishonor its previous owner had brought upon it. Thus Dark Sister passed to its next bearer. Prince Laenor would go on to wield the blade for a decade and a half in the service of his wife. Over this time, many would complain that the prince was not worthy of such a sword. History tells us that Prince Laenor was only of middling skill with a sword and certainly possessed none of the great talent that Prince Aemond and Prince Aegon would go on to develop. It is oft rumored that after the knighting of Prince Aegon in 122 AC, Queen Alicent pressed his claim to the sword to her husband, only to be rebuffed quite harshly. Others argue that this event is misattributed to Prince Aegon and that it was Prince Aemond, knighted in 124 AC, that the queen attempted to acquire the blade for. Whatever the truth of that matter is, the blade would not pass out of Prince Laenor's hands until 131 AC, when he granted it to his eldest trueborn child, Princess Jocelyn. An excerpt from Unbent, Unbowed, Unbroken by Maester Alec written, 209 AC. Lord Aeron Dane officially surrendered to King Viserys Targaryen during the second moon of 118 AC as the king's armies moved into position to threaten Sunspirit itself. There were many at the time, mostly Westerosi lords, that sneered at the decision, yet history has shown us that Lord Dane was every inch the equal of Lord Walter Will in the field of political maneuvering. Lord Dane ended the war believing that the loyalists of Princess Aeliandra had not taken a single loss and that Prince Garen's supporters had been utterly decimated. Word of the massacre at Ghost Hill was yet to reach Dornish ears, and news of the disaster nearly derailed the negotiation of terms between the king and Lord Dane, who was said to have called a halt to talks for 3 whole days after he was informed. Nevertheless, even with that dark news hanging over them, peace was declared between the 7 kingdoms and Dorne, with only the terms of Dorne joining the realm remaining to be laid out. Lord Aeron Dane was not to receive the generous terms that he had been offered at the start of the war, however, despite his optimism that he could yet receive them if he did not personally take the field. Not even Dornish anger at the events at Ghost Hill would see King Viserys bend in his demands. Peace talks would stretch on for months as Lord Dane and King Viserys each brought forth their proposals and counter-proposals. The Treaty of the Shadow City was the subject of much debate and scandal amongst the lords of both sides of the conflict at that time, and even as the treaty was signed, the war between the princess and the queen was beginning once again. Many Greens claimed the terms were much too lenient. They pointed to the centuries of raiding endured by the Stormlands and the Reach and called for punishment. The fact that Princess Rhaenyra's Black Lords supported the treaty as fair and just seemed to only worsen matters. Yet the Black Lords were not to entirely have their way. The first of the terms presented to the Dornish called for a temporary governor, with the matter to be revisited when Princess Aeliandra reached her majority, to be appointed by the crown to ensure the Dornish were not rearming for rebellion. It was stated that Princess Rhaenyra and Queen Alicent both petitioned King Viserys to appoint their chosen candidate, but it was Queen Alicent that would emerge victorious when Ser Gawain Hightower was installed in the position. The rest of the terms forced on the defeated Dornish were equally as harsh. The lands historically referred to as Will were seized from Dornish control and granted to Lord Boros Baratheon. Hostages were taken from every major Dornish family, including the last surviving scion of House Toland, with Ghost Hill itself falling under the control of Miles Sand, the late Lord Alad's bastard son. Perhaps the most painful term of all was the fostering of young Princess Aeliandra with Princess Rhaenyra. Princess Aeliandra was Lord Aeron Dane's niece, and only the reassurance that she would keep her title as Princess of Dorne would persuade him to agree to the fostering. Yet the Dornish were not entirely humiliated in the negotiations. As mentioned above, they were able to keep their title of Prince of Dorne. They also won financial aid from the crown to rebuild their shattered economy, and King Viserys agreed to officially take responsibility for the debt they had incurred with the Iron Bank. Yet these concessions would not raise nearly as much clamor from the lords of Westeros as the final one. King Viserys had decided on a suitable candidate for the hand of Princess Aeliandra. Lucerys Velaryon. An excerpt from The Black Queen, a true tale of Rhaenyra the Reformer by Prince Gaemon Targaryen written, 230 AC. The reunion of Prince Laenor and Princess Rhaenyra was so fraught with emotion that it moved many observers to tears. Despite what certain scurrilous rumors might have you believe, dear reader, Prince Laenor was in love with Princess Rhaenyra and had been since they had met as children. The moment the war with Dorne was over, he mounted the dragon Sea Smoke and flew to be in her arms once more. Lena Velaryon, another victim of later politics and dramatization, was similarly keen to reunite with her own husband, Joffrey Velaryon. Their reunion was more private but no less touching. The two dragon riders brought with them Princess Aeliandra, who was to be raised alongside the princess's own children. A wise decision that was later revealed to have been suggested by my illustrious ancestor, Queen Rhaenyra herself. Although in her own memoirs, that only those of the royal family are privy to, she explains that the Princess of Dorne did not settle well into her household at first, frequently throwing tantrums and demanding to be taken back to her mother and uncle. This can easily be forgiven, however, as children of 3 are hardly able to recognize the honor that comes with a royal fostering. It should be noted as well that Princess Aeliandra would later become a great friend of Princess Alyssa Targaryen, showing that she did come to realize what an opportunity she had been granted. Yet this book is not about Princess Aeliandra, dear reader, it is about the first queen of Westeros. A remarkable woman much maligned by the rumors of cruelty and tyranny brought against her after the Dance of Dragons, the contents of falsified letters created solely to besmirch the good name of her true love, Prince Laenor, and the almost criminal character assassination of her most loyal friends Joffrey and Lena Velaryon. We must let the actions of both Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Laenor during their reunion speak for themselves. I say, dear reader, that they shout the truth, for 9 months after Princess Rhaenyra greeted her husband at the Dragon Pit on his return from Dorne, Prince Aemon Targaryen was born. An excerpt from the text The Vulture Kings by Mara Ladybright, written, 245 AC. The third Vulture King is the subject of quite some debate with current affairs as they are. Whereas modern scholars agree that the first 2 men who bore that name were dedicated to Dorne and her people, the third Vulture King is shrouded in scandal. The first of these great scandals being that after taking the identity of the legendary outlaw, he did not cast aside his name. Whilst even Dornish records struggle to reveal the true names of the first and second Vulture Kings, the name of the third is known to all. Lord Walter Will. After the conquest of Dorne, House Will was attainted head in a declaration signed by King Viserys and Lord Aron Dane both. The former Lord Walter himself was declared an outlaw for his desertion in the Battle of the Bone Way, and Lord Kyle Ironwood was said to have promised his treasury and the hand of his daughter to any man that brought him his former ally's head. Many people argue that his taking of the mantle of Vulture King was an act of political genius. That he declared himself, like all others who had taken the mantle, loyal to Dorne and Dorne alone. I would posit that this explanation fails to truly explain his motivations. Walter Will had broken Nymeria's treaty and left an ally to his destruction in order to save himself. His act of crowning himself as Vulture King was one of desperation. A way to not only justify the raiding and foraging he needed to perpetrate to feed his army, but to give himself a way to strike back at those he thought had wronged him by failing to rise up in response to Lord Aron Dane's surrender to King Viserys. It should be quite telling that his first and the subsequent majority of his raids were carried out on Dornish targets. During the year of 118 AC, he struck twice at Ironwood lands, once at the lands of the Manwoodies and no less than 3 times in the lands ruled by the Fowlers of Skirich. Contrast this to the mere 2 raids he carried out in his own former lands, now governed by Bernard Stark and what remained of his desert wolves. In fact, he would go on to nearly decimate the lands of Ironwood and Skirich over the next 6 years. These are the actions of a man that blamed Lord Fowler and Lord Ironwood for their losses and capitulation, not those of a cool political actor. Indeed, if even more proof is required, he never struck into the Stormlands proper until he declared his allegiance to Prince Garin in 124 AC. For 6 years, Walter Will played the vengeful bandit king, but only then did he decide to retroactively justify and legitimize the crimes he committed against Dorne and her people with the formidable political mind he had demonstrated during the conquest. Walter Will is not, as some modern demagogues like to claim, a symbol of a better Dorne. He is a symbol of our worst natures, a symbol of anger and spite and hatred. He is a symbol of our divisions. An excerpt from the text The 3 Journeys by Lyra Cargill, written, 175 AC. In contrast to her later journeys, Lena Velaryon's first journey is exceedingly well documented. Modern scholars even have an idea of why she began her journey when she did. In the, admittedly oft-contested, letters between Prince Laenor Velaryon and Ser Joffrey Velaryon, we know that Ser Joffrey and Lady Lena began trying to conceive a new babe after her return from the conquest of Dorne. Unlike Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Laenor, however, they were not successful and fears began to be raised that the difficulty they were having stemmed from the well-known effects of Hag's grasp. They ceased their attempts after 6 months, as Princess Rhaenyra grew great with child once more. In Ser Joffrey's letters, he writes that Lady Lena found it hard to see her closest friend begrudgingly accepting what she desired most, but, as mentioned before, the letters are often contested in their validity. To summarize that first journey, during the 8th moon of 118 AC, Lena Valerian flew from King's Landing to Runestone with full permission to investigate the runes etched into its foundations from Lady Rhea Royce. Lady Lena stayed there for just over a moon's turn and produced one of the most accurate recordings of the runes to date. Records from this period in Runestone also tell us she borrowed numerous tomes from the library, some of which were never returned. She did not depart the Vale after concluding her business at Runestone, instead flying Vagor across the mountains of the moon, seemingly at random. Many speculate she sought the hidden valleys of the mountain clans. Indeed, the later discovery of pre-Undul settlements in those valleys seems to confirm this, and claims have been made of recent human and draconic presence in those settlements. From the Vale, Lady Lena flew north. She did not receive a warm welcome at Winterfell, if Ser Joffrey's letters on the matter are to be believed, despite the rich gifts she offered for a chance to examine the castle proper. She stayed less than a week at the capital of the north before flying to the Wall. Here, her gifts were gratefully accepted and she stayed for quite some time, often questioning the stewards and builders. We do not know if Lady Valerian attempted to take her mount beyond the Wall, although later claims from Kristen Cole, who would go on to become First Ranger, says that she did not, having been warned that to attempt to do so was to invite disaster. He did not say who had warned her or what form this disaster may take. Her next flight took her to the Iron Islands where she stayed for a week as a guest of Hagen Greyjoy. We can only speculate what she wished to examine there, but her haste in departing the islands requires none. Hagen Greyjoy was in declining health, but he was no less the lecherous man he was reputed to be. Continuing her odd pilgrimage about the legends of Westeros, Lady Valerian is rumored to have visited the God's Eye and Harrenhal. Records from the Great Castle have never confirmed it, so the matter remains shrouded in mystery. We do know that, whether she visited the God's Eye or not, her next point was the Hightower. An odd choice of destination given that she and Ser Ormond Hightower were reputed to hate one another. Yet Lady Lena won a month in the High Tower from Lord Garmon. Ser Ormond wrote to his cousin, Queen Alicent, with a detailed report on the matter. He claims that she examined the tower from top to bottom but seemed most interested in the black stone that forms the base of the ancient structure. Ser Ormond goes on to complain that Lady Valerian refused the services of maids and stewards and was secretive, almost verging on paranoia, during her stay. When her month was up, Lady Lena is said to have left without any complaint. Her final stop on her journey was with her kinsman, Lord Boros Baratheon at Storm's End. Like Lady Rhea Royce had, he reportedly gave her full access to the fortress and she was keen to take him up on his offer, only returning to Princess Rhaenyra's side after 3 months spent studying Storm's End. An excerpt from the text The Silver Falcon by Maester Godric written, 219 AC. Lady Jane Eyre would stay in King's Landing for some time after the conquest of Dorne was brought to a close, staying with her cousin Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen until she was great with child once more. It is thought she intended to witness the birth of Prince Aemon, wanting to support her beloved kinswoman, before returning to the Vale for her own wedding. Yet as winter wore on, Lady Eyre would be forced to return alongside her falcons as the mountain clans, much reduced by a bitter winter with no end in sight, began desperately raiding any target they could reach. Even ancient fortifications that had stood against the onslaught for thousands of years were feeling the strain of the mountain clans' death throes, and sacked farmsteads, burned villages, and looted convoys became common sights within the Vale. Matters only seemed to escalate. Redfort was nearly burned in early 118 AC, Wickenden barely fought off a raid a month later, and Lord Gon Corbray was attacked, and his guards slain, within sight of the walls at Strongsong. Even the Bloody Gate suffered a raid, so bold were the mountain clans in that period. Yet before the Vale could raise its banners in earnest, politics dictated that there was a more important matter to attend to. The marriage of Ser Dennis Corbray and Lady Jane Eyre. It was said to be a lavish affair, attended by no less than 5 princesses and, one might argue as Princess Rhaenyra was heavily pregnant, 1 prince. Even Lady Rhea Royce was recalled from King's Landing to witness the affair, bringing along her firstborn son, Jon. The grand tourney held afterwards was no less lavish than the ceremony and feast that preceded it. Yet where many may have grumbled at the cost in the face of renewed raiding and the sheer toll of winter, Lady Eyre was quick to reassure them and lay the foundations for the claiming of her title of the Silver Falcon. Using surveys taken in ancient times, Lady Jane had negotiated a significant loan with which to found silver mines in the Mountain of the Moon after the winter's end. It did not escape the notice of many that a significant portion of the mountain said to contain the rich deposits of minerals were placed in areas claimed by Arryn kings long dead with ancient decrees. ancient decrees that Lady Arryn made clear still applied. Despite that brief political upset, it was clear that in a few short years Lady Arryn had gone from barely maintaining control of the Vale in the face of those that would support her kinsman to undeniably ruling it in truth. An excerpt from the text An Age of Science by Wisdom Harlan written, 299 AC. There is evidence that ether was used in minor surgeries performed by Maester Gerardis on Dragonstone as he was developing the techniques of administering it. Yet it faced its first true test on the 12th day of the 5th moon in the year 119 AC. Keen scholars of medicine will note that this date is not long after the discovery of the properties of iodine or, to give it its common name, dragon salt. This is the most likely theory as to why Maester Gerardis was not present in King's Landing and why events were allowed to develop as they did. Regardless, records kept by Grand Maester Melas show that Princess Rhaenyra visited him no less than 3 times in the preceding month, complaining of pain in her fingers, broken by her uncle in a fit of rage years ago and ill-healed in the aftermath by Grand Maester Runsider. The Grand Maester, in his own notes, dismisses the pain as a product of the princess's broken fingers reacting badly to the ongoing winter, which grew more bitter as spring failed to arrive. As time went on, the princess fell ill with ever-worrying symptoms. She contracted a fever, sweated excessively and was said to have barely been able to eat due to nausea. She had to be sedated with milk of the poppy as the pain returned to her fingers in unimaginable levels and the hand itself swelled to twice its size. After her symptoms failed to improve despite the Grand Maester's complete attention, King Viserys became desperate. By royal decree, Maester Gerardis returned to King's Landing and was quick to identify an infection in the badly healed bones in her smallest finger. Fearing that the infection may spread and cause further complications with the princess's health, Maester Gerardis opted to amputate the problematic finger. To this end, he used the untested ether to ensure the princess would not awaken during surgery. Whilst this surgery was a resounding success, many maesters objected to the use of ether quite vocally. It was this outcry, and a formal complaint from the Grand Maester, that allowed the Citadel to act as it did. As 119 AC came to a close, Maester Gerardis was formally summoned to the Citadel to answer to an official investigation into accusations made against him. The Citadel alleged that he had passed on forbidden knowledge and secrets to the alchemists, engaged in witchcraft and foul magic, withheld knowledge from the Citadel, committed vulgar acts and, most seriously, that he had broken his oath to be loyal to Dragonstone by using an untested substance on the princess. The inquest continued well into the new year as maesters and archmaesters alike quizzed Gerardis on Dragonstone, the Alchemists' Guild and who had invented the wondrous things that its campus produced. Gerardis remained loyal to Dragonstone, however, and soon after the inquest came to a close, he was formally stripped of his chain and denounced as a maester. If the Citadel expected Gerardis to be humbled by stripping him of his chain, they were sorely mistaken. No sooner had Princess Rhaenyra received the news than she invited the man back into her household and refused to take the replacement the Citadel offered. In defiance of convention, Gerardis would go on to officially open a school of healing on Dragonstone, training many of the wise men and septons that would go on to serve the people of King's Landing and the Narrow Sea. An excerpt from the text The Three Journeys by Lyra Cargill written, 175 AC. The second journey of Lena Valerian is harder to summarize and relies much on the assumptions of her contemporaries and folktales. What can be said for certain is that 2 months after her daughter was born prematurely in 119 AC, Lena Valerian mounted Vagor and flew to Braavos with not even a year passing since her last journey. She did so without the permission of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, who still counted her as one of her ladies-in-waiting and a close friend. Upon hearing the news of her lady's unauthorized departure, Princess Rhaenyra is said to have flown into a great rage. Contested letters between Joffrey Valerian and his lover and good brother, Laenor Valerian, claim that Princess Aemma Targaryen was conceived shortly after Lady Valerian's departure as Ser Laenor sought to comfort his wife at the loss of such a good friend. One of the greatest proofs that can be offered is that Princess Aemma was born almost 9 months to the day after Lady Valerian left. Records from the Sea Lord of Braavos at that time tell us that Lady Lena did not tarry long in Braavos. Dark rumors swirled about her stay there, and it was a contemporary theory that she sought to gain access to the House of Black and White, the House of Assassins so shrouded in mystery even now. It seems unlikely she was granted an audience, however, as she soon left Braavos for Lys. She is known to have tarried in the Perfumed Sister for near 2 months, a guest of Magister Lotho Targaryen, who was oft seen taking her on tours about the city and accompanying her to the many parties the Lyseni are known for holding. Yet Lady Lena's tours of the oldest parts of Lys, its temples and its libraries are not the only thing of note to happen during her stay there. From records recovered from Magister Targaryen's cache, kept safe through the Rogue Prince's rebellion that took place not even a decade later, we know that towards the end of her stay, Lady Lena Valerian received a letter from a most unlikely source, Princess Helaena Targaryen. Westerosi scholars argue the accuracy of such records. Princess Helena would have been approaching her 11th name day and was fostered with Lady Jane Eyre at the time. What cause would a daughter of Queen Alicent, no matter how beloved they both were by Princess Rhaenyra, have to send a letter to the writer of Vhagar and a staunch Black? Magister Targaryen never writes what the letter contained, or if he did the contents were destroyed in the rebellion, but he does write that after reading the letter, Lady Lena became distressed and began making plans to depart Lys immediately for the next stretch of her journey. Where she had been happy to accept Magister Targaryen's aid in planning her adventure, she now tore up those plans and refused to let him see the replacement itinerary. Within a week she had departed Lys, refusing all entreaties to stay further in the city. We know that from Lys, she went east to Volantis. Where she had been free and sociable before, she was now secretive and paranoid. She attended no social gatherings, instead spending her time exploring Volantis and the surrounding Valyrian towns along the River Rhoyne, even daring to venture as far as the Sorrows. Records of her exact movements have never been released to Westerosi scholars by the Volantines, however, despite many requests they do so by the royal family. From there on, we only have Magister Targaryen's writings as to what she intended to visit before she changed her plans: the ruins of Assaria known as Ves Khadak, the Demon Road with its cities of Mantares, Borash, Tolos and Illyria, the Isle of Cedars and its cities of Velos and Gozai, and the ill-reputed Isle of Tears and the ruins of Gagassos. Nobody can say for certain which of these she truly visited, but if Magister Targaryen writes truly, it seemed Lady Valerion wished to tour the crumbling glory of her ancient ancestors, the Dragon Lords of Valyria. An excerpt from the text The Silver Falcon by Maester Godric, written, 219 AC. Lady Arryn's power in the Vale was to only go from strength to strength after spring was officially announced in 120 AC. The winter had been long and hard, the Vale was still reeling from the Mountain Clan's desperate rebellion, food was running short after 5 years of weather that had only grown worse as the years went on, and the start of 120 AC saw Princess Helena Targaryen, her ward, fall deathly ill. Yet as the weather slowly began to warm, the people of the Vale, both lords and common folk, were given even more reason for celebration than the changing of the seasons. Attended by one of Princess Rhaenyra's midwives and her dear companion, Jessamine Redfort, Lady Arryn gave birth to her firstborn child. A healthy, lusty son she named Osgood Arryn, for the king of Mountain and Vale that had passed the decree she relied on to lawfully seize the mountains in which her future silver mines would be founded. Even better for Lady Jane, a month after her son's birth, Princess Helena finally awoke from her almost comatose state. Yet not all in the Vale were pleased with the political situation. Gunthor Royce, for he was officially a Royce despite his later actions, grew ever further from the lordship of Runestone. Lady Rhea Royce, his aunt, now had 2 healthy sons, Jon, born in 118 AC, and Yorwick, born in 119 AC. Once the roads were safe for travel in 120 AC, Gunthor Royce made a progression to the Gate of the Moon to petition Lady Arryn to restore him his rights as heir of Runestone. He argued that Lady Royce's first husband yet lived and that the annulment granted to Lady Royce that allowed her to marry Lord Torrhen Royce was obtained via bribery and deceit. He argued his cousins, born of that union, were therefore bastards. Lady Arryn was not of the same view. In a blistering letter sent to Lady Rhea Royce, who resided in King's Landing, Lady Jane denounced Gunthor Royce and had him imprisoned in his quarters. Lady Rhea was inclined to be merciful to her nephew, however, and although she banished him to stay with his kin at Coldwater Burn, she did reaffirm that he was a Royce in name as well as blood. An excerpt from the text The Green Death by Maester Oswell, written, 288 AC. The Green Death is a fascinating nickname when taken in context of the time period, who originally coined it and just who earned such a name. On the surface of it, a child of Queen Alicent Hightower being named the Green Death implies some sort of political motivation. Looking at the moniker, one is forced to wonder just how it could have come to be. Is its bearer a staunch green and fearsome fighter that brings destruction to the Blacks? Is the bearer a traitor that ensured the Greens failed in their plot to crown Prince Aegon with their actions? The answer is none of these. The nickname was not even coined by those who knew about the Black and Green factions. After all, what would the mountain clans of the Vale know about the princess and the queen? For it was these long-destroyed barbarians, these old terrors of the Vale, that first called Princess Helena by the sobriquet the Green Death. It was only a few months after she had recovered from her mysterious illness that the mountain clans finally united under a new Griffin king. The clans were not given to written records and much of their culture was destroyed after the Battle of the Bloody Gate, but survivors claimed that the clans threw their support behind the Griffin King because he promised to take back a full third of their lost territory by beating the armies of the Vale in pitched battle. Today, this sounds laughable. The Vale could call upon armored knights, veteran men-at-arms, and double that number in levies that had a score to settle with the clans. In addition, they had the falcons, a force designed to neutralize the advantage that the terrain granted their opponents. Yet the falcons had taken losses during the conquest of Dorne, and the forces of the Vale chose their battle site poorly, against the advice of Lord Dennis Waynwood, leader of the falcons. When the battle began in earnest, the Vale looked set to take large losses, whilst the forces of the Griffin King were set to withdraw, having barely taken any. No doubt they hoped that the force would pursue them even deeper into the mountains of the moon, where they could wear down their foes' numbers to an even greater degree. They were not to be given the chance. Despite the young dragon Morgul being barely the size of a horse, Princess Helena mounted her and flew to aid the Vale army. Having never faced a dragon in the field, the mountain clans threw down their weapons and fled in the face of the sudden onslaught of fire. The Vale army was quick to rally and pursue, following Princess Helena's mount as she harried the fleeing tribesmen. As for the nickname, well, Morgul was green and she rained fire and death from above. An excerpt from the text Bastard born by Rue, 155 AC. After Queen Alicent found the two bastard boys, Adam and Alan, during her stay on Dragonstone to birth Princess Visera, they were moved away from the prying eyes of the court and its gossips. This only further fed the rumors that Ser Laenor had fathered them. Rumors that made King Viserys angry enough to unsuccessfully try and visit the boys in 119 AC. They returned to their home in the castle town on Dragonstone in early 121 AC after 4 years in the small and nameless farming village that Princess Rhaenyra's alchemists perfected their agricultural techniques in. Nobody knows what made Princess Rhaenyra order them to be moved back, as interest in the boys, now 6 and 7, was always there as the Blacks and the Greens played their games. They lived there for 3 moons before their mother caught Princess Rhaenyra's eye. In order to make the glass they were producing on Driftmark, the glassworks needed a lot of seaweed. As the first work at the site got underway in 120 AC, the seaweed farms that had been invented by the Wisdoms were making plenty of it to feed the glassworks. When Westeros realized the potential in cheap and local glass, everyone wanted to buy some. Soon the farms were not making nearly enough. Princess Rhaenyra flew back to Dragonstone to find out what was causing issues at the farms. She also met with Adam, Alan and Marilda of Hull. Marilda had been the daughter of a shipwright and had been involved in trade since she could walk. We don't know why Princess Rhaenyra visited the mother of her husband's bastards, but the next day, the princess took Marilda on a tour of the farms. Even though Marilda was only a year older than the princess, she bowed to the woman on certain matters and suggestions Marilda made. Many people tried to talk the princess out of putting Marilda in charge of improving the farms, but the princess would not be told. She appointed her interim director, and Marilda was so successful in providing enough seaweed for the glassworks that 6 moons later, Princess Rhaenyra put her in charge permanently. After this happened, Adam and Alan moved to live with their mother in the castle of Dragonstone proper, as Marilda was now a highly placed member of Princess Rhaenyra's administration on the island and reported to the Castellan himself and no one else. Marilda and her family were also said to have been given a generous cut of the seaweed farm's profits. Despite an allowance from Princess Rhaenyra, these profits, and her pay as director, Marilda did not rest on her laurels. She invested her money in many trading ventures. Most people agree that she was advised by Lord Corlys on whom to give her money to. Soon she had enough money to buy her own ship. Even though she still worked on the seaweed farms, her ships multiplied, and by the time her first son was made a squire she had 7 ships. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.